Welcome to The Side Quest, a weekly show on the Direct Beat podcast where we interview interesting people adding to the North Carolina startup community. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello, welcome to The Side Quest. It is June, the week of June 24th, and we have a nice and hot day here in Durham. But my name is Joe Colaby. I'm the Direct Beat Godfather. My guest this week is none other than Bill Spruill, who is not in Durham. We're going to get a bit into his background, and we're going to continue our riffing on our opinions on the world and how everything should work. And so definitely, hopefully you stay tuned in and listening and watching so you can get all the answers to how we improve the triangle and tech around the country, in addition to some other global issues. So without further ado, Bill, how's it going?
It's going great, and it's great to be talking to you today, Joe. Always looking forward to the smile and the energy. So glad we're getting together this morning.
I'm glad you presented that way, because when I was younger, it was more like hyper, unfocused, like screwing around, not doing what he's supposed to be doing. So that is a very positive spin. So Bill, you're not in the Triangle right now. You are somewhere else. So where are you? What are you doing?
Absolutely. I'm in Birmingham, Alabama this morning. And, why am I in Birmingham, Alabama, when my focus tends to be on the Triangle and so forth? But the reason is in about an hour's time, I've got a lunch meeting with a exited entrepreneur, much like ourselves, a guy named Segun Otalana, who sold his health IT company some years ago here in the Birmingham area. And we're getting together to have a interesting conversation about interesting things around tech and doing tech in the Southeast and how to achieve big outcomes. He sold his business for over $1 billion. And we
hopefully he's buying lunch.
Certainly, I hope, maybe buys lunch, but we'll see. We'll see. No worries either way. I'll pay for the lunch for a great conversation. Always.
So, wow, that's those are big numbers. I don't know. Birmingham's really interesting because they have their little kind of tech ecosystem there as well. We don't hear about it as much, but I think if we were based around in Atlanta, which is a lot more of a center point, they tend to kind of cover that a lot more. Have you kept up with the Birmingham ecosystem? I know of it a little bit, but not tons.
Not a ton, but I'm going to get educated today. Segun is very active in the Birmingham tech community, and he's actually doing a lot to pay it forward into the community, which he has now made home. He's originally from Nigeria and moved here, started the company, and grew the business, and he's remained here and doing a lot to help grow the community. So I think we're actually going to have lunch, go to a couple of local events before I head back to Raleigh later this afternoon.
That's great. Well, I definitely want to hear about all that. I also want to hear whether he pays for lunch or not. And then if so, then I might be making a trip out to Birmingham. It's like, hey, buddy, where are we going? You took Bill here. Where are we going? So to dig into ecosystem development, I think it's helpful to understand a little bit how you kind of got into it. Like me, I'm sure you've told your tale many times, and it's like, let's talk about something new. So we're going to just hit it a little bit and really get in a bit more into modern day. And specifically, what I want to ask is, a lot of people don't know when they look at your background that not only are you a huge supporter of CD today, but like back in the day, and back in the day is in terms of the mid-90s. Hold on, I feel footprints are coming up on me from the side here. So we're gonna see whether my son pops in this room. But actually you were worked there. And actually back in the day in the 90s, I actually used to volunteer at the predecessor of CD Venture Connect events. And so it's connecting the dots. There are a lot of as you once called us, fallen gods, or I forget what the term was, that we actually started pretty active or doing what we can at our level in the ecosystem to kind of start, or at least the early stages of our career. So that being said, how'd you get to CD? When were you at CD? And how did that maybe influence your entrepreneurial journey since then?
Sure. Sure. So look, I joined CED as a function of I'll call it serendipity. Uh, CED was a temp gig for me, and literally I went there as part of a temp operation to work the front desk.
Wait, so real quick, when you say temp, you're talking about like through a temp agency,
That's correct.
not a philosophy that
No,
I feel
no,
like to be here
not at
forever.
all. Yeah, this was not a gig economy thing for me. This
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
the old school temp agency
Yep.
that, called me up and said, "We have an assignment for you. Would you do this?" I said, "Sure." And it was to go and cover the phones in the front desk at this organization out in RTP off of Highway 55. And, I got there and started learning, started absorbing. And I think the original, I'll say, gig was supposed to run a week or 2 weeks, and it kept extending. It kept extending. And before I knew it, they offered me a job. I guess I was a really good receptionist at that time. But I actually then started working on their programs. So, I was the guy working the table, passing out name badges, meeting people. And I got to meet some great early, entrepreneurs in the community like Max Wallace, um, Tim Huntley, um, Peyton Anderson, Scott Andrews,
Yeah.
and Bob Young.
Yeah. Those are all the 90s movies and beyond that, but 90s, certainly 90s movers and shakers.
100%. And I started to see, how the sausage was made in terms of how startups were built, funded, supported, and so forth. And really fell in love with the exercise and what was going on. I moved up at CED, became director of programs over time. Watched that organization grow, was a part of the growth of the organization in the early days, and then left CED in the 2000s, early 2000s. My timing was probably not the best timing because I wanted to move over to the for-profit side of things.
Yeah.
And, I moved over just in time to participate in the Web 1.0 meltdown.
Yeah. Yeah. That's about when I started my business. We got that in common. Like, hey, world, whatever we're doing at that time, don't do the exact opposite.
Exactly. All the money dried up, everything, there was no venture revenue, there was no customer, everything was frozen.
I try to, with some entrepreneurs, even investors now, explain how high things got, even in days terms, like really, really, like insane.
Yep.
There's high and there's insane. And then how, on the flip side, how hard it fell and everything, like not just your business or one's business, but like everything went away. And how, we're still in pretty lofty times, and hopefully it wouldn't swing back that hard, but when it swings, it's noticeable.
And it happens quick.
Yeah.
This, was swift justice or swift revaluation. Maybe, we'll call it that very quickly on that side. So I got to see, both sides of the coin, the highs and very much the lows. And those helped educate me for what eventually, was to be my longer term journey in entrepreneurship.
So what I'm interested in is, we talked about the serendipityness of CED, which then many, we're going to like jump around here, but many years later, after you have this big, success in many ways, including financial, it gives you the means to kind of give back with your time, money, and expertise to CED roughly 25 years later, right? But then the job that you went to, or at least you ended up, I know there was a bit at Dataflux and a bit where you're doing Address Doctor.
Yep.
What I don't think, I'm guessing, and what I don't think people realize is you have a very, it's almost like parentheses type career, right? You kind of sort of begin with CD and you're kind of very involved in helping, working with CD in many ways, in addition to what you're doing. But then if you take one set of parentheses in, you look at data flux and what that was, and Agile and what you're doing. And then for what I understand of global data consortium, it's like, hey, like those are different, but they're in the same space. I bet you this guy, those things were related in that he kind of learned some things. Maybe you can talk about those sets of parentheses and how all that ties together and how you kind of got started on that journey, which also might have been a little random.
Sure.
And how that played many years later.
Sure. It's always interesting when I talk to founders about going deep in a vertical, going deep in an industry, and people are always confused by that because, but that's what benefited me. When I started at Dataflux, I was a channel manager, business development manager.
More or less right after CD?
That's correct. Okay. I was looking for a job. Well, actually, it was right after Startup Street. So I left CED, went to this for-profit Startup Street / Fusion.
Well, now you're throwing all like the one-hit wonders from the 90s right in there.
Exactly. So that was right after that failure point. So again, I talk to people sometimes about how failures lead to success.
Was that a Fusion Ventures thing?
It was.
That was like back in the day. People don't realize there was essentially a .com incubator that was based
Brightleaf Square.
Brightleaf Square. In fact, later on, Bronto, first office out of my house, we were squatting in that space after it had long fallen. But that is a whole different show. We could talk about the Fusion Ventures, but I'm sorry. Yeah, continue on that.
The best thing I got out of that was being able to eat at Foster's downstairs. And Pop's Diner right around the corner, if you remember that place.
Yeah, well, they both moved, but they're both not. They're kind of in the same area still. So,
yes, absolutely. But when that failed, a good friend of mine at that time from CED, Katie Fabizak, she was over at Dataflux, and she basically said, "Hey, we need a biz dev person over here. Why don't you come over here and do this? You're good at relationships." And I said, "Okay, sure. I need a gig." So I go over to SAS and
Dataflux was acquired by SAS.
That's correct.
Dataflux was a local company, right?
Yes.
And so at this point, Dataflux was now independently run. I mean, it's part of SAS, but kind of still independently run.
That's correct. We were off campus on Weston Parkway, for those who know the area. And the thing about Dataflux, their product did data quality. So it was fuzzy matching, address verification, and name matching, identity resolution.
Kind of familiar, right?
You're going to hear that all along the way. And so we were signing partnerships for resale of our product throughout, the data industry. So IBM, Oracle, Informatica, Business Objects at that time. These are all big enterprise companies that were all using our products, and we were driving a lot of channel revenue that way. And that was my business that I built out. And I built a lot of great partnership relationships out of that as well that were utilized over the long haul. So then I eventually graduated from Dataflux. It was about a 5-year journey for me there. Great experience, but one of the things I share with people is I am not a big company individual. I learned that lesson very early in life there, and I held to that lesson. That
we are similar. I discovered that and making it very obvious. So in terms of not being a big company person, SAS being a big company, Dataflux not being a big company, but then it was acquired, you were there several years. Was there an assimilation process such that how Dataflux felt and lived on day was very different at the end of your tenure than at the beginning?
That's correct. It definitely eventually changed. In fact, sales started to try to influence how we were working with our channels because the channels were competitive. And that was definitely one of those, situations where you're almost faced with a choice and you say, okay, do I sort of capitulate to sort of bad behavior? Or do I support my channel partners and figure out ways to work on long-term with them?
Yeah.
and I played a portfolio game with the channel partners, and that led to me joining a company called Address Doctor, which was one of our channel partners uh, at that time. And Address Doctor was doing something called international address verification. And so there's a theme there. Yeah. And that's why we were partnering with them. And when I joined the business, we were doing just under a million in revenue. So very much a startup.
Where was it based?
Germany,
Okay.
Mannheim.
Neat.
And I started working with them again, biz dev, because they couldn't afford me. Actually, what they were paying me was a pittance. I was working with some other companies in a consultative relationship, and eventually I started setting up the channels for them. You know, I'm a broken record with channels, and uh, the revenue grew. And ultimately, 6 years later, we were topping out revenue wise, roughly about, 10, $11 million, and nice recurring healthy relation revenue. We didn't raise a nickel in the business. And so it was all profit at that point for the most part. And we actually sold that business to Informatica. And, one of the
Yeah.
little stories.
Another big machine.
Yep. SAS actually approached us originally in that exercise, and but they underbid on the number. We told them the right number. They chose not to believe, and we ended up going to Informatica.
Yeah.
And
That's
Informatica
how it
said,
goes.
"Let's write that check." So sold that business, worked at Informatica for 2 years, and then got involved with a company called Locate, which did international address verification.
There we go.
Ultimately helped them sell that business to a company called GB Group in the UK. And then my co-founder and I at that point started GDC, which we still had a consortium. We started that business with the idea of doing international address verification. And of course, we pivoted that business into other things along the way, and it led to a much more substantial outcome than the prior two companies.
Yeah. Well, it just built and built and built and built. And no, I think that's a really, I love hearing the story, right? Every time I learn something new. But I think things are connected, and they're not just independent transactional events that some folks, I think, like to think that success in entrepreneurship is more like this genie in the bottle, like you just hit it right, and other times are completely different, you didn't. And it doesn't, not like that. They're much more connected and understanding the space deeply. And I'm sure leveraging those relationships, or how to leverage those type of relationships broadly in the same domain, that kind of led to the culmination of success that you ultimately had. So with all that, but these days, you're not, as far as I know, you're not doing international address verification. You're doing much more ecosystem building and supporting entrepreneurs of different groups. So maybe talk, and you're doing that through, and everyone wants to say second F, right? And I get it, but it's 2NDF. Maybe first, easy enough, explain the name, because I think a lot of people would think Second Foundation because they see the ND, but that's not it. And also explain your title, right? Your first speaker, and kind of what's with
why? What is
explain all that?
What is that? What is all that, Bill? Why do you have to be different?
I'm the grumpy godfather, so I'm not like, don't worry about it. No judging coming from over here.
So look, it is Second Foundation. I'm a huge Second F stands for Second Foundation. And I'm a huge Isaac Asimov fan, and he wrote the Foundation series back in the 50s. It's one of the preeminent sci-fi novel series out there for those who have probably never heard of Asimov. He was the OG in terms of sci-fi.
Oh, yeah.
And first speaker really was the title of this small cadre of librarians, academics, whose job it was to help um, basically shepherd their ecosystem, their galaxy through a period of chaos into the next period of calm. And I very much feel like that's part of the work I'm trying to do in the triangle around how do I help shepherd this ecosystem to the next big thing while we're in this period of fragmentation and XYZ. How do we actually get to the other side of that? How do we actually create a bigger outcome for this community? And the reason we're doing that is simply because I'm a huge fan. I learned a lot from this community. Obviously, I achieved a great outcome as a function of this community. And I actually believe this community has done a great deal to help that happen with others like yourself. And we probably, I feel like almost since the Web 1.0 meltdown, I would say this community has been challenged to sort of really get back on its forward footing again. There's all it's done well, but it hasn't done exceptionally well. We have not achieved what I would call true greatness again. And how we get back there, how do we recreate empire, if you will? That's my goal, and that's why we call it Second Foundation.
So with Second Foundation, related to the triangle, and I know you're tied in some things outside the triangle. You've been doing it a few years, and inevitably with time, you've probably tightened your thesis, and you probably went in with the idea, but then through life and proof, you actually see what works. What are the type of programs or things that you all are focused on where you feel, because you can't do all things, right? You got to pick
Yes,
your battles.
exactly.
That's how I look at it as well. What are those things that you guys are particularly focused on, either from an investment side or from a programmatic side or from some other side?
So across the board, we have a very tight thesis. Actually, we are heavily focused on hard science, deep technology, business building in this
Mhm.
region. The reason is because we have the inherent core products with the university research that we developed here, the scientific base that we have here. We actually have a fair amount of the management talent here as well, although people would debate that. But because of the history of this region around everything from material science to ag tech to biotech, therapeutics, we've got a very diverse but also unique clustering of people, knowledge, resources here that pretty much the rest of the country doesn't actually have in terms of, that diversity. A lot of that's anchored by the big three universities that are here. And so we are heavily focused on commercialization or monetization of research, if you will. So most people talk about research and tech transfer here. We talk about monetization of that research because that's the metric we're really looking for. Research for research's sake is great, but how you actually monetize that research, either through licensing, a company formation, that's the real measure of success for this particular community, or at least that's what our thesis is.
So last week we had Jeff Welch of Duke New Ventures on the show, and we very much spoke about this same topic, right? Obviously, he's talking from inside of Duke perspective, and he's more or less leading effectively a management consulting group within Duke that is helping folks assess the business opportunities and kind of put the business structure around things so they can get to the place where they could be an independent business. So when you look at to that end, when you look at the triangle, we are doing things. The universities do have people that are doing things, and there's some people that sit outside, like yourself, that are helping do these things. What do we need to be doing more of or better in this arena? Because one of the questions I asked him early on is, hey, back in the day, they used to say Stanford used to do it all right, and we used to do it all wrong. That's why the Bay Area, it's not exactly true, but the Bay Area is more successful than this area. And why don't we do it like Stanford? right? And so, and other schools like that. Do you have an opinion or thought in terms of what the universities need to be doing the same or differently or more in this region based on what you might have seen in the Boston region or the Bay Area or some other academic cluster?
Sure. So look, if you take a funnel approach to this, it's actually very easy to see if you take that business model. At the very top of that funnel, we have a wide aperture of research that we develop here, both in the university environment and in the private environment. We generate a ton of IP. However, and the people who generate that are all brilliant people. They're all smart. They're wonderful people, capable people in terms of the generation of that IP. But what we don't do is spend a, focused, layered approach and taking that IP, working with experts to say, what of this IP should be licensed? What of this IP should be then or spun off into a business unto itself? And when you think about spinning off into a business itself, do you have the right team to focus on building that business? Because not every researcher, in fact, the vast majority of researchers
Yeah, most
are
of those
not
researchers. Yeah.
are not company founders.
Yeah. Different.
And providing them with the education to understand what that journey is like so that they're able to comfortably accept, hey, I'm a researcher. If we decide to build a business, I'm probably best suited to be a technology officer or a chief research officer, but I'm not supposed to be the CEO or a chief sales officer. That's someone else. And you bring and build those teams such that you give that technology IP the best chance within that company formation exercise. Um, but frankly, if we're able to actually help a lot of researchers understand that their IP should just be licensed to larger organizations, that's not a bad outcome either, because
No,
that generates great revenue throughput for both the researcher and the community, but also the universities and ultimately the community itself. So that, education is the number one thing, and helping researchers and universities get better at that translational exercise is a big part of where we're focusing a lot of our energies now.
what do you think? One of the things I was talking with Jeff about had to do with capital.
Mm,
And he also believed all those things that you're saying. Obviously, that's what he does every day, but
yes.
also that this region was very capital light compared to a region, say, like where New York, there's a lot of capital because they're more of a financial center and we're not a financial center. And we need to find ways to tap into capital outside the region because one of the we'll see what you think about this. The challenges with deep or hard tech is it's
Capital.
more expensive than creating an app that creates cool new emojis, right, off someone's phone. But it also is like the way more impactful in terms of people's lives. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the first thing to think about is when we say this region doesn't have enough capital, it should be clarified. There is a ton of capital in North Carolina, but that capital does not invest in this type of outcome. That capital does commercial real estate, that
Yeah,
capital does other things.
yeah,
So I always like to make sure we're very clear that there's money here, but that money is not
I like
pointed
that point.
towards these type of outcomes. So re-educating that money around the opportunity around this and why it matters for North Carolina, I do think is one of those areas of improvement that we could have.
I like that. I want to take that nugget and it's almost like having short courses on venture capital for real estate people or venture capital for whatever family businesses, and kind of like make that bridge. And so uh, leaders in those areas can help understand how this asset class is similar or different from the one they're coming from.
100%. And if you think about it, many North Carolinians with those type of assets are actually invested in venture, but generally those money managers are investing in venture outside the region.
Yeah.
And if you sort of use the local versus Starbucks analogy, If you go to a Starbucks, yes, you are providing some economic impact for your local region, but generally, 99 cents of that dollar you spend is going to Seattle
Yeah.
and elsewhere. But if you go to a local coffee shop, 99 cents of that most likely is staying in your community. Same asset class, different outcomes from a downstream impact perspective.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's even I mean, we're gonna have to wrap up pretty soon, but we could rip on this all day because you can even talk about the really how you look at the trickle down of capital based on venture backed companies that were highly venture backed, where they're through many rounds, and so they're getting very late stage capital from very big funds that are elsewhere, and then you look at where those funds located and what is their LP base. So and how much of that capital is trickled back. You certainly get the founders, and there's certainly employees, and I get all that, but it's not exactly the same when you compare it to something that was very lightly capitalized, more founder employee driven, and if you just look at the numbers, it's just black and white in terms of what type of financial outcomes are really going to impact this region, where the money stays in the region versus just goes back to its original source.
Correct. So, we're going to wrap it up. I recognize education on local money, one thing. The other thing, though, is money is fungible. Money will go where the opportunities are. And what we don't do a good job of is talking up the opportunities in hard science, deep tech in this community. We've done a great job of talking up software, AI-like companies. And look, we're both software entrepreneurs. And
it's easy to understand. So,
yeah, right. But what we don't do is talk about as much as we should about companies that are doing, magnet development, for instance, rare earth magnet development, which is what Vulcan Elements is doing. Or we don't talk about Voxel, which is an NC State spin out that does some amazing engineering work, and they have great customers like GE, Siemens, and others. We don't talk about those companies enough. And so that's another exercise where if we were talking about them and talking about the community and the strengths here, money would look at that and say, am I missing out on opportunities because they seem to have all the right ingredients? I should check them out more. And I'll wrap with the fact that we were able to bring over 7 billion in AUM in terms of venture managers to the region a little over a year ago for an event at NC State. And they came, we did not pay them. They did not pitch me on being LPs in any of their funds. These people came because our team spent time telling them about the RTP message, and they made the trip to see what was interesting. And there were investments that came out of that exercise. So it's possible to get that money, but it takes concentrated work and effort.
Yeah, and I think you do a great job with that. I know your travels are often related to, singing the praises of the triangle outside of the triangle and how we're not an island and how impactful that really is in terms of long-term influencing the trajectory of the ecosystem here.
Absolutely.
Thumbs up. Well, Bill, it's been wonderful to have you on the show today. I really appreciate it. I hope the rest of your travels in Birmingham go well, and I look forward to connecting with you sometime during the summer when everything calms down and we can continue our conversation over a beer or coffee or something else.
100%. Always looking forward to those occasions with you, Joe, and whether it's in RTP or at the beach, wherever it is, let's do it.
That sounds great. All right. Thanks a lot, Bill. We'll see you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for joining. Be sure to follow us through your favorite podcast platform. Now get back to working on your side quest